This year's protests forced more Americans to face these realities and see they're not about some kind of rare exception or just bad apples. Americans reminded this year of other lives that mattered, other innocent black people killed. Walter Scott, shot to death in the back. Laquan McDonald, 17 and shot to death with 16 police bullets. Freddie Gray, tossed into a van where he died of a neck injury. Eric Garner, a father choked to death in broad daylight in an eerie precursor to the George Floyd video that upset so many Americans. Linwood Lambert, who police handcuffed and drove to a hospital where he was supposed to get needed medical care. He was denied that by police, who used their tasers 20 times. He died in police custody. Each story about each life may break through more than the numbers, but here in the news, we'll show you the numbers tell the same story. Police kill about 1,000 people a year. The rate continuing at the same pace this year, 804 killings so far, per the Washington Post. It's the same pace for charges. Before 2016, police could go years in a row without a single murder conviction, despite thousands of killings. Now, that's ticked up slightly in just these most egregious killings caught on tape. One officer convicted about per year over the past 5 years in research by Philip Stinson. Now, just as some Americans rush to overestimate how Obama's victory might end racism, this year it would be the wrong lesson to assume that the scrutiny I just showed you on police brutality and racism is curbing the actual deployment of systemic racism. So all of that drove the protests. But numerically, police brutality is actually the smallest part of systemic racism. Yes, all those videos that you just saw there about the sliver of the justice system that just deals with arrests, the first part of any police interaction. But the majority of the economic and racial injustice exists elsewhere. So, for example, in America, did you know that most of the people in our jails are innocent? That sounds weird, right? But under the cash bail system, if you're rich, you're innocent until proven guilty and you prepare for trial at home. If you're not, you're innocent until proven guilty, but stuck in jail until trial because you can't pay bail. Well, being in jail doesn't feel very innocent. Most people in our jails are awaiting trial. 90% can't afford bail. The system disproportionately discriminates against black Americans, from how judges apply it to the higher poverty rates driving incarceration. Now, those are numbers. Here's a person. 28-year-old Sandra Bland was pulled over for not using a turn signal, then arrested, then jailed on a $5,000 bond that she couldn't afford. Now, she later died in jail, bringing extra scrutiny to her case. But most Americans cannot afford these bonds. And the over-policing of black Americans means they run into this cash problem more often. That's just bail. Then there's the trial itself. Americans see crime shows where everyone gets their day in court, but that's fiction. Most cases never go to trial like that. And you can see why tonight. Legally innocent defendants held in jail, where they lose their jobs if they have them, no money for bail or a good lawyer. They face huge pressure to plea, and most take the deals. That's unfair to the poor and tilted by race, because prosecutors systematically push more jail and plea deals for black defendants than whites. And then judges sentence them to more time for the same crime, especially in the drug charges that clog our system. So black Americans end up imprisoned at 5 times the rate. So those police brutality videos are important this year, but they are simply the most visible, shocking part of this much wider system, which is harder to catch on video, harder to swiftly expose all its cruel catch-22s and raw deals. Now, the iconic filmmaker Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th does some of that, showing how slavery is the foundation for mass incarceration.
It's with the Nixon era and the law and order period when crime begins to stand in for race. The prison industrial complex relies historically on the inheritances of slavery.
And in that Nixon era, those White House aides for Nixon later admitted they saw the war on drugs as a way to get the public to associate blacks with heroin, to criminalize them and disrupt those communities. From DuVernay to the scholar Michelle Alexander to the writer James Baldwin, many have emphasized these are not new systems. They continue old ones.
We are still governed by the slave codes. Now, when I say a slave rebellion, I mean that what is called the civil rights movement was really insurrection.
So everything I just told you is actually just a relatively brief tour of racism in criminal justice, which itself is one slice of systemic racism in the rest of America. For that, I want to go just briefly through a top 10 list. Number 10, the American dream of owning a home. Most white Americans do, compared to a minority of black Americans. 9, the dream in any meritocracy, higher education. Most whites graduate college. Most black Americans don't. And the racial wealth gap persists apart from education, bringing us to 8. White American households with only a high school diploma make about $100,000 a year. Way more, 10 times more than the wealth of black households with the same exact education. It gets worse. 7 in 10 Americans today. I should say 7 on our list of 10. If you're a white person with only a high school degree in America today, you're going to make more than a black American with a bachelor's degree. So when you hear that people should just pull themselves up and get an education and get to work, remember, race kicks in to block fair pay for that progress regardless. Here's another example of how, bringing us to number 6. Statistically, many employers prefer to hire a white, formerly convicted criminal over a black applicant with no record. Think about that. That's all just business as usual. And it stokes wider inequities for when new problems hit. Like 5, the recession hits everyone, but it's hitting black communities harder. 4, the pandemic pushing far more black Americans into hunger. And 3, into missing housing payments. And 2, driving more black businesses into bankruptcy than other companies. All the way to number 1 right now. All the long-term factors that make black Americans twice as likely to die from the coronavirus. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.